Well, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone, and it's time for another Shooter's Coffee Chat. And you know how we've read a lot of magazine articles, shooting magazines, and the title of the article is, "What's your favorite gun?" Or you might read, "If I could only have one gun, it would be," or "If I were grabbing a gun to get out of the house in a quick exit situation, it would be," this kind of thing, right? Well, I'd like to propose that we do a shooter's coffee chat on what's the gun you've shot the most. And of course, the gun you shot the most would have a lot of stories behind it. Like, well, for instance, if you're a competition shooter like the Reloader dude, obviously it's going to be something like a 9mm semi-auto pistol that he uses in competition. He's going to shoot that a lot. And for some of you out there who have shot competition before, the gun you've shot the most is probably one of those competition guns that you used in matches. And of course, even if you're a competition shooter, the gun you might shoot a lot of and you might want to share with us would be something like a 22 rimfire that shoots, gives you a lot of practice for the match gun you're using. So I'd like to ask the members of the information and shooting community that we have here, that includes Thorzak 777 and Elvis Ammo and Loads of Bacon and Johnny's Reloading Bench and Full Lead Taco and the Reloader Dude. I'd like to ask you guys out there, propose to you to grab a cup of Joe and sit down and do a shooter's coffee chat on the gun that you have shot the most. Well, for me it's easy, and that is, I've already given you a hint there. You see the recoil buffers and the recoil springs. The gun I've shot the most is my 1911 IPSC pistol. Now, in the late 70s and early 80s, Jeff Cooper was really major. And his whole idea was to shoot and be able to have accuracy and speed and power. And so when IPSC was developed, it was a competition based upon Jeff Cooper's precepts. And we had to deal with things like power factors in those days, which means that you take the bullet weight times the muzzle velocity, divide by 1,000, and if you were over 170, you were major power, and that gave you advantages in scoring. Well, if you shot a minor power, which is less than major, of course, if you were accurate, it didn't make any difference. So today, the emphasis on power factor is not as great because the shooters can use 9mm, and because of the great accuracy of today's shooters, they can not have penalties caused by misses. But back in the IPSC days and early days, we wanted the advantage of being able to hit a lower scoring ring and still score like a major hit because of the power factor. And later on, when I was doing steel shooting, again, this gun was used because the .45 caliber was very good at knocking down steel. Commonly would burn up 500 rounds on Saturday nights, and then 2 other times to the range after work during the week. We would be standing ankle deep in brass, and in fact, 45 ACP brass is the most brass that I have. I have jars and buckets and even boxes full of 45 ACP brass that, in various stages of shot. Now, I've got a lot of great stories about this gun, but I'll just share 2 of them with you today. And that is that there was a time when, in the early days, we do all this reading, right? And I got this gun, it was new, brand new out of the gunsmith. By the way, this gun is built on a 1970 frame, and it has a 1980s slide on it. But when I first got this gun, the reading in those days was that when you did a magazine change, what you did was you put the new magazine in and then you held the trigger back as you were dropping the slide. That was the recommendation early in 1980 to do a magazine change. Well, that happened to be bad policy, and there weren't too many shooters on the pistol line, but now of course I had the gun pointed down range, but I went ahead and did a magazine change, held the trigger back, dropped the slide, and instead of the gun behaving normally, it went just like that. And of course I let go of the trigger, and then I took the magazine out and cleared the weapon, and I counted. What happened was the gun went full auto and fired 4 shots in about that quick a time. Like that. 4 rounds were fired. And of course, the range master came down to see me about, maybe a couple minutes later. He came down and said, "Did your gun go full auto?" And I had to say, yes, it did. Well, of course, when the gun went full auto, I stopped shooting the gun that day, even though it was working fine. But ever since then, I don't hold the trigger back, and I don't think it's recommended now to do that. So at any rate, I took it back to the gunsmith, and what he did was he took it into the back room, and it only took him a couple minutes. I mean, it was really quick. But he came back out and said, "Your gun's all fixed." And the problem was that the disconnector that he had installed was a little bit on the short side. And so when he put the longer disconnector in there, that solved the problem, even if I wanted to hold the trigger back, but I haven't done it since then with no problems. So that's one story. Kind of an interesting story to get a full auto weapon like that, and the cyclic rate on the handgun was amazingly fast. The other story is that when we were shooting our matches at our local range, every once in a while we'd get someone drop in that happened to be a master class shooter, and in fact this guy was. His name's Tom, and he came to visit us, and they did that in those days to promote the IPSC sport. But he was master class, and in the early days of IPSC, the magazine change, the speed of the magazine change and smoothness of it was a big part of the sport. And you would win and lose stages just on your ability to make magazine changes. Anyway, what Tom did when he came to visit us, and of course we were all in awe of him because he shot in matches with some of the big names at the time, people like Rob Latham and Brian Enos. He was on a first name basis with all of them, and actually shot in some super squads, although we never saw him in any of the videotapes that we had got back in those days of early IPSC. But anyway, what Tom did was, the first thing he did was he pulled down our plate rack, because we had a plate rack, and he pulled it down and turned it upside down. Because we didn't have a fast reset, we had to go up there and manually reset all the plates. But what he did was he turned it upside down so that the plates didn't need to be reset. And it allowed him to shoot more rounds and get in more shooting in the same time, because you hit the plate and it flops back and flops back down, automatically resetting itself. So that's the first thing he did. And then he proceeded to do a demonstration, and it was amazing. He would draw quick as a whistle from the holster, of course, and fire one shot and immediately do a magazine change. Then he'd shoot a double tap and immediately do another magazine change. And then he'd shoot 3, and then he'd do another magazine change. And his magazine changes were blindingly fast. Easily within a half a second to a second per magazine change, and actually getting the next round off at the same time. So his magazine split times were amazing. They had to be somewhere around a half to 1 second. And on the low side of a second for sure. So that gave us a glimpse in person of how quick magazine changes could be done. And so we practiced long and hard to try and get that kind of speed. And then Tom's speed and accuracy were phenomenal, because what he could do was, if you can envision like seeing those old clips of Muhammad Ali doing the speed bag, Tom would hit the plate and it would rock back, and then before it came back down, he'd hit it again so that he actually stopped the forward movement of the plate. Then he'd hit it again and it'd go back, and then before it came back all the way down, he'd hit it again and stop it. And then the amazing thing is that we had these foot-tall bowling pin cutouts made out of steel, half-inch steel, and they had a base, and you stand them. What we did was we stood them edge on to us so that the target was only half-inch wide, while Tom would hit that plate, the edge on target, and as the plate was starting to topple, he'd hit it again with a double tap and help that plate go down faster. But I felt bad because when he left, he came back and said that someone had broken the headlight on his car. And so I went out and checked out his car. It was a high-performance car, but the headlight was broken. And the way it was parked, it couldn't have been a ricochet that did that. So I don't know how that headlight got broken, but it did. And that kind of put a damper on that evening's visit that he did. A gun like this has all the bells and whistles. I could describe it to you, but basically it's not exciting now, because a lot of these things that this gun has is now stock. But all of that came about because of all the work that we did back in the IPSC days with the extended safeties and the match barrels and the nice sights and the extended beaver tails and the new triggers and the extended slide releases, the magazine wells for fast changing, the compensator, the guide rod, the full power mainspring, the recoil springs, the 18.5-pound spring. You needed that to shoot the major power well and have the gun hold up. And it's got a recoil buffer in there and all that kind of thing. This match barrel, now you get match barrel stock, but it's also throated to feed reliably with almost all kinds of ammo, including the semi-wad cutters. Well, I'd like to thank Willie Young, because he sent me these moly-coated .45 caliber bullets, and when I got them, they brought back all those memories from the IPSC and from the steel shooting days that I did before the turn of the century. At any rate, this video is getting a little long for a shooter's coffee chat. We want to keep it to 8 minutes or less, and besides, I got a cup of coffee here to drink. So take care. Hope you guys can do a coffee chat also on this. Shooter's coffee chat. The gun you shot the most.